I'm Lowell Gustafson. My topic is on the relationship of complexity and the university. The university is clearly a complex place. This is the way that my university happens to structure it, but it's common for a lot of them, lots of different schools and colleges, and then within colleges, departments and subfields and interdisciplinary programs and centers of excellence and all kinds of a complex organizational structure. But the university seeks to be more than just a holding company for a number of different academic silos, as important as disciplinary focus is. It also provides a universe of knowledge. It wants to unite its parts. It wants to synthesize and integrate. It wants to tell a story. It's a complex story. It's a story filled with diversity and paradox, but it is a universal story in a certain way. So what does that mean? Well, it is a complex story that the university tells. Well, complexity is complex. And so I want to talk about 5 different ways in which complexity can be used within the university, in many ways already is, in order to tell a unified, coherent, complex story of this universe of knowledge. The first one is maybe the easiest one. This is the idea of unidirectional emergence, that we start with the Big Bang 13.82 billion years ago, and we go in a series of steps of transitions or thresholds until we answer the question in a way that's satisfactory to us about where do I come from, where do humans come from, how did we get here? And that there's a coherent story, which is, if you draw from the various disciplines, is able to answer that question in a really magnificent way. This has been the center of the big history project, that the physicists talk about the Big Bang and quarks and neutrons and protons and atoms, and the astronomers talk about stars and galaxies and the fusing together of all of the other elements that make us up, the 7 octillion atoms that make me up, and how did they come together in this incredibly complex set of relationships, which is me and you. And then the chemists talk about the different combinations of elements into chemicals, the formation of the same elements in different minerals, carbon, for example, everything from graphite to diamonds. The geologists and the astronomers talk about the development and the accretion of planets. The biochemists talk about chemical evolution, the emergence of amino acids and proteins and lipids and membranes and RNA and the Krebs cycle and metabolism and how we manage energy. And finally we get to the prokaryote cells and Luca, the last universal common ancestor, at least here on Earth. And then the evolutionary biologists lead to all of the transitions over this vast expanse of some 3.8 billion years or so. The physical anthropologists pick up that story relatively recently, since our common ancestor with chimpanzees around 7 million years ago, and then the many different hominid species from then until we finally get to ourselves, Homo sapiens, some 300,000 years ago. And then the cultural anthropologists pick up the story with the increasingly complex sets of relationships among persons in kinship groups, and then eventually in villages and agriculture and cities and nations and empires. And now here we are, depending on how you date it, maybe it's the last 500 years, maybe it's since the end of the Cold War, but some period of time in which increasingly global structures are being made until we finally get to our situation of today. So this is if you unify what comes out of many different disciplines, you start to get a coherent notion of who we are. Now, one notion that you get from all of that is that actually complexity doesn't just move in one direction. It doesn't just lead to us now. It doesn't lead to just me, to my group, to my nation, to who I am. It leads to all kinds of other groups of people and many other natural occurrences. And in fact, it's really important for us to be interested in that and to be aware of how embedded we are in a much larger universe than one which is just about ourselves. And this comes out of the story that the Big Bang just doesn't go to our sun. The universe is not heliocentric. It doesn't all revolve around our sun any more than it all revolves around our Earth in a geocentric model. It moves in many directions. It creates many different types of stars. Our sun is just one of a whole host of them. Some smaller, some much bigger. You have a diversity here. You have a multi-directional complexity, relationship within relationship within relationship, which moves in many different ways. There are alternatives, different types of galaxies. We had thought at the beginning of, about a century ago, that the Milky Way in the universe was the same thing. It turns out there's hundreds of billions, if not a trillion galaxies, many of which are beyond our view, and a great variety of them. That even life on Earth doesn't just lead from the beginning of life to us, that we are not at the top of the tree of knowledge or a chain of being or whatever else, with everything else being sort of peripheral. That's not the way to look at evolution. Instead, we see Luca, the last universal commonensis, moving out in many different types of directions, so that there's an incredible diversity of life forms. There's an incredible diversity of humans once we get to that cultural era. But that cultural diversity and natural diversity are in fact very much related to each other. Nature and human nature are not so different in this regard, and that diversity is part of that story, and yet it's all included in what we call life, and that we find ourselves embedded in that. And in fact, it's when we only ask the question about where do humans come from that we can start getting into trouble and cause the harm and even extinctions of other forms of life, which will not serve us well either. Anyway, so we've got unidirectional complexity and multidirectional complexity, and complexity is complex because it also includes no emergence in any particular direction. There's the story of stasis, of continuity. We still have vast clouds of hydrogen and helium, which have been around since the Big Bang. Some of them are getting around finally to forming stars, and much of it is still just floating in an interstellar medium. So that's a possibility. And Earth history, as interesting as Earth history is, the geologists will sometimes tongue-in-cheek talk about the boring a billion years of which nothing in particular seems to happen. It's a little exaggerated, but there's something to that. We have the idea of living fossils. At each stage of complexity, lots of members of that level stay where they are, and they don't continue to evolve. We start with bacteria, the type of prokaryote cells such as what Luca was. And they're still around here, and they vastly outnumber the more complex life forms. So there's a lot of continuity here. Politically, this seems to matter. I mean, so does nature support the idea of progressive change, of development, of emergence, or of stasis, of stability, of sticking with established patterns? And the answer to that is yes. I mean, it's a complex story that includes both. And there's decline. There's not always a relationship within relationship and more emergent complexity. Sometimes there's less complexity. The story of complexity is complex in that regard. You can have declines, increasing simplification, endings, as well as beginnings, and we've had plenty of those. We've had 5 major extinction periods since the Cambrian period, and before that, the Great Oxidation event, which was maybe even more destructive. So pessimists take heart. Things fall apart. Chinua Achebe was right, and we seem to be living a period largely of our own creation right now, in which we've only cared about where humans come from, and who cares about the rest of the natural world? Well, we're learning that we should have been caring, and that we do need to start to care, or just accept, look, individuals die, species die. The vast majority of species that have ever existed are extinct now, and why should we be any different? There's a 3.8 billion year history of life. We've only been around 300,000. The Earth is going to continue for another some billions of years. How likely is it that our species is going to be here for any appreciable portion of that future? That we need to come to terms with our personal endings and with our species ending, and that's part of it. Or even the universe. This fascinating book by Katie Mack. The universe. We have a Big Bang. We've got all the developments until now, and it will come to an end. There's various ways in which it might come to an end, but it does seem as though the arc of the universe ultimately bends towards oblivion. So we can end on that sort of sour note. But there's lots of intelligent and reasonable people who say that, look, we used to think that our galaxy was the only galaxy in the universe, and now we know there's so many more. Why should we think that our universe is the only universe? And there seems to be some at least theoretical evidence that there could well be an infinite multiverse with infinite variations and options. So there's great hope for the future. That complexity is virtually endless in this regard. The humanities have been stressing this for a long time, and sometimes fearing that science points us in one causal direction. I don't think that's been the accurate interpretation of science, but the humanities want to stress that human imagination, creativity, is part of the complex story, and needs to be taken into account, and we need to go back and see how the story of nature actually is consistent with a postmodern view of not single causality and directionality. This is where the university, when it integrates the tremendous advances made within each of the disciplines, but in which each of them break out of their silos and see their relationships with each others, that the university can present a coherent but complex, a diverse story, which includes all of its parts, to present a universe of knowledge. Thank you.